It's Sam Swikowski here from the Fremantle Dockers, and you are listening to the Footy Mailbag Podcast with Damo and Clarky.
Hello and welcome to the Footy Mailbag. My name is Damo, and on this week's episode, we'll be talking about the buys, including ways to set up your starting sides and all of that. But first, let me introduce my co-host. Joining me, as he usually does, is the effervescent Clarky. How are you, my friend?
Effervescent. I like that. It's my favorite thing in the world that I am legally obligated to be on this podcast because I'm not a good strategy guy. I'd say that at the top. I love talking through tactics, but I'm really, really interested to see what the vibes are out there. All of this because I know that everything's going to go out the window at some point.
To be honest, I don't think you have to be a good strategy guy to play SuperCoach. I think you just have to know what looks like a good tactic when you hear it. So
yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a good tactics guy. You can just watch footy and know who the good players are and then adopt tactics from there.
I did figure out my best ever tactic last year that dramatically increased my finishing ability. I'll share that at the end.
Oh, stay tuned. And from SuperCoach Edge, we also have Damo, another one just to confuse the listeners. Thanks for coming on, mate.
Thank you. I'll try and replicate your voice a bit, Damo, as well. Just confuse a lot of people that are tuning in, and they won't know which Damo. I think last time every time we've reconvened, we've had a couple of collabs.
I think I've got a solution here. Here. So, Clarky, help us decide because you're the one that's going to have to talk to us. To make it easier for the listeners, how should us Damos refer to not only each other but also ourselves across the episode?
Well, there's a few different options. There's the classic BIP, the bananas and pajamas. You got D1 and D2.
Damo, we used that in the past, yeah.
Yeah, since you're the host, Footy Mailbag Damo, you would be D1, and Damo SuperCoach Edge be D2. However, there is another alternative, which is SuperCoach Edge Damo, D2, sorry. You do go by Damo J88, so we could call you Demodge. If you're so inclined, and Damo, you can remain Damo.
I do get that.
Yeah, it's very exotic.
Yeah, it is.
Demodge. And what origin is that? SuperCoach. Yes, I understand.
Yeah, we all understand the universal language of SuperCoach, so yeah, everyone understands.
So I think we should stick with D1 and D2 because that's slightly less confusing.
Okay, so I'm D1 and you're D2, and then we've got Clarky over there in the corner.
Yep. Thanks for having me, boys. It's good fun. Good fun. This is what I come on for. This nonsensical chit chat, and a bit of SuperCoach as well.
Tell us, listeners, when was the last time we had content? I believe you'll find round 17, 2023.
This season is unlike any other we've had before in SuperCoach. Not only do we have extra trades, but we've also got the opening round and the buys that come with it. So there's also the buys in the middle of the season as well. So there's lots of discussions about how people are going to set up their starting sides. Clarky, what's your personal tactic at this moment? Are you avoiding round zero players? Are you limiting the amount of round zero players that you're starting? Are you just ignoring it? How's your team looking at the moment?
At the moment, my personal strategy has been to just ignore it in the weirdest way because in my mind, I'd rather have the players that I want to have when those buys are out of the way early. I don't want to be... I know I'm going to trip myself up by being a bit too tricky, trying to jump across from, I know we've had discussions of jumping off, like, say, for example, like a Flanders to a Tom Green after the buy kind of thing. I know that's going to trip me up because it can get a little bit complicated and you can get in your own head and you go, right, I need to pick a player up from round 0 to X buy that needs to make enough money. So Jack Billings, is probably a good example who I know we'll touch on a bit further later, but he's an example of someone people would pick up early. He pops in a couple 70s, 80s, hopefully. You make your money, you move on to greener pastures. And for me, I don't like playing that way because I don't want to waste those trades. I've been wasteful in the past which has significantly, and this is my hot tip. You didn't have to wait till the end, guys. My hot tip is, even though we've got more trades, don't use them frivolously. Just because you have more doesn't mean that you should be using them every chance that you get. I understand there's going to be some really great and really, really interesting tactics out there, but for me, I want to play it straight. We know it's going to be best 18. I'm going to try and limit the amount of players that I have across those buys, but I'm not going to change my whole setup and approach just to accommodate for those early buys.
And what about you, D2? How is your starting team looking, and what's your personal tactic around the round zero?
So I'm very similar to your thoughts, Clarky. I've kind of been toing and froing, going back and forth between, like the tactics that, like you mentioned there, a similar one where you start with Tom Green and flip him for Sammy Walsh when Green goes into his buy and Walsh comes out. Like, I was tempted by that, and then I'm like, well, looking at last year, when we had, 36 trades, I ran out of my trades after round 19. And I'm like, okay, well, with those extra 4 trades, they would have come in handy. So it kind of goes to that point there. Like, even though we've got 4 extra trades this season, can we really afford to think, oh, yes, we've got some extra trades. Let's kind of be frivolous and, footloose and fancy free. But I don't think we really can, because look at last season, suspensions were the biggest thing. And then we saw in recent days as well, the AFL have come out, rubber stamped, contesting the ball in the air, the Maynard issue.
Yeah.
And then
good.
Tackling players. Yeah, good.
Good.
And then tackling players from behind is another one as well. So all those incidents are going to happen again. And it probably even more so says that because they're now fully fledged rules, players are just going to get rubbed out. So that kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies. So on the point about trades and being frivolous, I do agree that you kind of should keep them close to your chest, despite the fact that, these early season buys, they're going to be a bit of an issue, and you can potentially go down that route of being a little bit tactical, but I wouldn't advise using all of them, all the extra 4 trades. If you look at it in isolation, I wouldn't look at that, but I'm sure we'll chat about it at length through the episode.
And even throughout the season as well.
Mm.
Personally, with my team, I haven't avoided round zero players, but if I'm weighing up one player against another player, I've probably gone for the player that's going to play the most amount of games over that period of time, just from a total points aspect. But it hasn't stopped me from picking up players like a Gideon Coleman or a Sam Flanders if they're someone who I really want to start with. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm avoiding it because I'm worried about those points and those players missing at any point. But if I've got one player weighed up against another player, like Jordan Dawson against a Tom Green, for example, I might go for the Jordan Dawson instead, unless the pros for Tom Green really outweighs Jordan Dawson. And at the moment, I'm going with Tom Green because I feel like Tom Green's got much more pros than Jordan Dawson does. But that's some of the things that I do weigh up, whether I want them to be available throughout the whole period of time or whether I want the more dominant player.
So the round zero, just to clarify, and this will move, Damo, I've got the itinerary, so I'm going to smoothly transition us to the next point. So the early buys, round zero, teams that are playing, their prices will change after round 2. That's correct? That's what we're assuming. So the early buys, we've got Brisbane and Carlton in round 2, and Gold Coast and GWS in round 3. So the biggest concern that I have when choosing, and I'm going to keep on saying Tom Green because I'm actually really, really bullish on Tom Green in this preseason. I just love the way he goes about it. It's a good pick. I've got a post-it note that I talk about endlessly that Lek made me write down and stick on my computer screen probably 2 years ago, and it just says pick players that you actually want. And Tom Green is a player that I actually want. The amount of money that would need to be made by a Tom Green or a Sam Walsh by the time that, well, Sam Walsh is in round 2, he's not even going to raise in price to jump to a Tom Green really, because of that buy. Am I understanding that correctly? Is that my mental math working? Yep. So any players that we would pick, it becomes like a major pitfall and another risky decision that we have to make early on in the season, when we know that these roles for these players develop over the course of a season, Harry Sheasel was really good at the start of the year, but we didn't know that that was going to continue from round 1 to round 23, 24, right? We had absolutely no idea that that was going to be the case. So who really are you going to go, I need to bank on this guy, he's 100% going to make enough money that it's going to be worth it to use a trade on to move forward? Like, picking around that seems like the easier and less risky option. So how many guys would you, either of your D2, I'll start with you, how many of these guys in those early buys are you thinking of starting at a maximum, at a minimum? Do you have a number, or?
Yeah, I've gone through and I've listed them. So for round 2, for Carlton's buy and Brisbane, I've only got the one player at the moment. May change to 2 if I decide to bring Walsh in, but it'd just be Williams. Round 3, it's changed already because I did have Tookie Miller, but I've since
love that.
taken him out of my team. I want to find a way to try and squeeze him in just because of his value. But I do think he's going to be a top 8 to 10 midfielder. So whether or not I start with him or try and get him during the season, I have to decide. But round 3, players on the bye at this stage, if I was to include Miller, it would be 3. Otherwise, it'd be 2 with Cadman and Flanders. And round 5, again, this has changed, but you probably substitute. I did have McRae, but now flipped him. Harms is in, so like for like. So I've got Harms, Grundy, and Jordan, having the 3 players on the bye there in round 5. And then round 6, I've got 4 with Marty Hall, Gawn, Billings, and Gipkus. And sorry, I think, yeah, that's right, yeah. So I don't know. I'm trying to work out a way that, what's the best, I guess, maximum number of players to have on a buy on any given week, and try and work out, if I need to sort of rely upon those rookies off the bench, what's the best way to do it? Or, if it gets to a certain point, if I maybe exceed, 4 to 5 players on the buy in the early rounds, do I then think about maybe using that tactic of relying on those extra trades to, flip a Tom Green to a Sammy Walsh, so it's a primo for primo and I'm not having to rely on a rookie off the bench? So I'm still at that point to try and work out what's the best formula, because it's obviously the first of its kind here this season. So I don't know what the best tactic is, and I'm sure we'll find out in season. But that's kind of what I think the ceiling is on any given round so far. It's going to be a maximum of 4. I don't know what it is, but I just don't want to exceed that number.
No, it's the perfect number math-wise, isn't it? Because best 22, you don't want to have missing more than 4 in a best 18 situation. So
exactly,
I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head, which is, look, listeners, I'm very dumb sometimes, but I'm very pretty. So the fact
I can attest to that.
The fact that I've just listened to that and gone, yeah, it is 4. Like, I think overall I'm actually probably no more than maybe 2 or 3 at the most, looking at it. I've got a good spread somehow.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens round 1, but D1, how are you approaching these early buys? How many are you starting at a max min?
So in terms of Brisbane and Carlton players, I've got 2, Gideon Coleman and Zach Williams. For GWS and Gold Coast players, I've got 2, Sam Flanders and Tom Green. And then the later buys with Collingwood and Sydney, and then Melbourne and Richmond, I think I've got 3 each for those rounds. I haven't consciously chosen to do it this way, but I've just managed to balance it somehow. But hey, it's worked out quite well for me.
Hey, the important thing is that it worked. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter how you got there; it worked.
Yeah, and like you said there, like, it's not about how many can you start; it's how many can you cover. So those players that are coming off the field because they're not scoring in that round, who are you putting on the field? In the case of someone like let's use Finlay McRae, for example. He looks like he's in the box seat to step into a midfield role at Collingwood. If he comes off the field, are you putting on Aaron Cadman, who's going to score, let's say, 30 points? Or are you putting on a Jeremy Sharp through some kind of dual position swing who can score 70 points? Like, who's coming onto your field when those players come off the field? And that's probably the other thing that you have to weigh up is it's fine to start these players, but how are you covering them when they can't score for your team that week?
Yeah, it's totally true, and it's something you need to factor in because I think it was Abs Magic. He, as we all know, this Godfather. He put out a video recently, and he compiled 3 different teams. It was like guns and rookies, guns and mid prices, and it was like a bit of a smattering of all 3 in the other team. And he was trying to work out like, at what point do you try and upgrade, and do you use the early rounds to flip players that are going into buys to players that are coming out of buys, and working out sort of the point differential for all 3 of those different side makeups. Of course, Guns and Rookies, probably no surprise, was the one that sorry, this is a spoiler here for those people who haven't tuned into his stuff, but outscored the other 2 teams. But I was thinking as I was watching it, and I was like, it's so hard to plan for, because we don't know how, like, for those players, those rookies that are going to be playing in round 0, we don't know how they're going to be performing across their first 2 to 3 games. How much cash are they going to be making? Like using James Jordan, for example, Sydney have their bye round 5, so he's going to have 3 rounds of hopefully price rises, you'd think. But again, we don't know the extent to it as yet. But it's something we probably have to be reactive to off the back of round 0, and work out and maybe shift the makeup of our teams off the back of that, and just roll with the punches there, because it's so hard to predict at the moment. Because if he has a downer, do you still roll the dice and hope that he's going to have a good game in round 1 and 2 in his second and third game? Or, do you look elsewhere and maybe save a bit of money, go for a lesser rookie that hasn't yet played in round 0? It's I don't know. It's so hard to sort of predict and really strategize at this moment. But we'll wait and see.
And unfortunately, with this kind of thing, we won't know the best tactics until it's already until the round's already been and gone, because it is something that's never happened before. And you mentioned there talking about price rises and jumping off at a team's corresponding round 0 buy, and I've heard of a tactic and I actually heard this on the coaches panel when they were talking about Jack Billings in their top 50 series. They were talking about starting Jack Billings and then jumping off at round 6, where he's had 4 price rises, and then going down to a rookie that you might have missed earlier in the season, and then you bank 100 or 150k or whatever it is. That he's made, and then you keep the cash generation going in your team. But like Clarky said, if you keep on using the trades that we got extra, most people ran out of trades because of last season's brutal nature, and the MRO rules have changed. We've got all these extra buys. We've got another round of the season that we didn't really think meant much last year, but we can realize does this season. We realize what that means this season. So does trading someone like a Billings or even a Josh Gibcus at their round 6 buy round, is that actually a viable tactic?
My biggest concern is people can sometimes underestimate the value of having a playing player as well. So if Jack Billings is staying in the team, Josh Gibcus is staying in the team, then there is still more money to make. Is there an element of risk that you're willing to adopt to go down to, say, a rookie who might be on the bubble, and then you end up with what's his name, who was in Gold Coast defender who stayed on my bench for 22, 23 rounds and never played his 3rd game? Delisted now, I believe.
Oh, gee, you're testing.
Yeah, I know, right? You know who I'm talking about.
Charlie Constable.
No,
yes.
not Charlie. Was it Charlie Constable?
Yeah,
Charlie Constable.
Yeah,
Charlie Constable.
Ex-Cat, yeah.
Yeah, stayed on my bench all year, and I was shafted. Like, there's an element of that. So I struggle to predict whether it will be the most optimal move, but ultimately as a strategy, if somebody did it, I wouldn't be like, oh, you're insane. That's absolutely psychotic. No, it makes perfect sense. Bank the money, right? Like,
And
there's no question.
and I guess I said it when I was sort of introducing the topic there, that we won't know the best tactic until a round's been and gone. And so we might criticize a tactic when it happens, but we might get to round 10 or 11 and realize that that was probably the best tactic at the time.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. The other thing as well I was thinking of on the drive home actually this evening was, and it goes to that that example there with Jack Billings. So he's got the bye in round 6, and I was thinking, okay, well, if you trade him going into his bye in round 6, he's had 4 price rises as you mentioned, but at that point, say for example, he's made that much money, he's actually gone gangbusters, season best to that point, or career best even to that point for him. And say he's still got a low break even, do you bite the bullet and trade him for obviously another rookie in order to bank the cash in order to upgrade your team earlier? Or would you prefer to hold on to him despite the fact that he's going into a bye and you may have to play a rookie of lesser quality in order to hold him and potentially make a bit more, say an extra 100K out of? That's something I was thinking of, and I was like, I don't know what I would do in that situation. Obviously points is paramount in this game. So would you prefer to don't worry about the extra cash the extra 100K that he could bring you down the line if you hold him, and trade him out for, if it allows you to bring in another primo? I think I'd probably do it, but yeah, it's a good sort of conundrum to think of because it could happen.
I mean, the forward line's not exactly cut and dry this season as it is.
Hey mate, no.
So if Jack Billings comes out and averages, let's say 90 over the first 5 rounds, but before the corresponding round 0 bye, you'd probably want to keep him if you think he can keep that up, because a 90 average could be a top 6 to 8 forward this season.
I think we'll see that it will be, to be quite honest, seeing what we've got there before knowing any DPP additions.
So if he's come out and averaging 90 and your original plan was to trade him at Melbourne's round 0 bye, I don't think... I mean, obviously we keep talking about not knowing what the right tactic is until the round's been gone, but...
I hope you weren't here to get a definitive answer, listeners.
But I don't think it would be smart to trade him if he's come out and averaged 90.
No, absolutely not. You'd be insane. That genuinely would be insane to go, I've got a guy who's averaging 90, I'm going to cash him in. But
those who are listening here who have come from the old Jock Reynolds podcast, Leckdog and Patch would talk about something that they call the Bruin maneuver, where someone traded in Travis Cloak. Travis Cloak averaged like 100 over 6 rounds, and then they traded them to someone who had a low break even, and then made another set of cash, and then they'll manage to turn one player into 2 primos. So there is that opportunity that goes with Billings if Billings comes out and averages that much, but I just don't think it's smart, even with the extra trades, to trade someone in a position that isn't so black and white at the moment.
Yeah, and especially not knowing who that's going to be, right?
And then on the other end of the scale, you've got the round 13 bye with just Port Adelaide and Fremantle. I've seen teams that have 10 players combined from these 2 teams. That's just silly.
All right, we get it. You love Sunrise. Is that still a good joke? Are we still making David Koch jokes in the year of our Lord 2024? Holy, that's a lot. I don't have a single Port Adelaide player in my team at the moment. I've got 3 Freo players, but only because I think it's really funny to think that to pretend to myself that Odin Jones is going to get a game on my R3. I just needed a body for a moment.
Can we just talk about the fact that Odin is a great name?
Yeah.
Hugely immense name for a ruckman, and it's sad that he's never going to get to play as a ruckman because he plays for Freo. But I'll enjoy seeing him in Victoria in a couple of years.
pretty sure Odin was the father of Thor, wasn't he?
Correct.
The good old
The
Marvel.
All-Father, if you will.
But yeah, back to the point.
I've
D2, I don't think you can stack your team with Port Adelaide and Fremantle players, even though it is an attractive buy round to target and have players from.
Yeah. No, I don't see the merit in doing it. If it was no disrespect to being a Freo man yourself, D1.
No, we allow disrespect here.
Okay, that's good.
despite what the shirt says.
Yeah, I can see that. See a flame making its way up that jumper in the background there behind Demo.
Yeah.
But no, I think if it was two teams that were, I guess, I mean, Port is pretty decent quality, but if it was a team with a bit more strength to it, I mean, Port probably is, but Freo to a lesser extent, you could maybe, in some weird, strange universe, try and validate it, but I don't think you can. Even so, it's just you're trying to gain an advantage across, a couple of rounds, just with stacking your team at the detriment of missing out on the likes of a Bontempelli, Dacos. Even if you want to sort of just talk about guys that have the early, the double buys virtually, I think you'd want to be locking in those players ahead of stacking your team, Port Adelaide. And I think it's just, I don't know. To us, it probably makes more sense and it's straightforward. That's why I would never have thought about doing that ever in my life. So it's quite a strange question to try and address.
You know what, D1, you're just going to let D2 disrespect your team like that. But you know what? I think people are picking Port and Freo players because A, favourable buy, but B, they represent teams with potential. We don't necessarily know what the limit of the upside of these players. Hayden Young being probably the best example. Everybody talking about, Hayden Young in the midfield. He's going to do it, guys. This is the time. So we're all picking him in defense. I was saying to D1 just off air that the player I'm enjoying picking, this is not based on statistics. This is not based on anything other than it makes me feel good when I hit the plus button on his name. One Nathaniel Fyfe. In my forward line at the moment, just because I like it. It makes me feel good, and it's February. What are you going to do about it? Damo, can I say I swear? Anyway, I think we end up picking these players from teams that we know have potential in roles, positions. Maybe there's restructuring. Maybe there's... You could say the same thing. I reckon people are probably picking, 4 to 5 players from teams like North Melbourne, maybe even West Coast, maybe even Hawthorn, like these teams that are on the rise with all these kind of loose pieces that we need to figure out what's that going to look like. And you're just trying to hit a battleship, aren't you?
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's a unique situation.
Don't pick
for
10
to really
though.
Consider. Yeah, I think. Yeah, it goes without saying, I think, to us, but just go with a more balanced side. If you're keen on a couple of extra Port and Freo players, you go for it, but don't do it to the detriment of the rest of your team and stuff yourself up for the preceding X number of rounds before Port and Freo's bye. Yeah, but just when you mentioned Nat Fyfe, that sent shivers up my spine.
I saw it. I saw the shivers physically manifest.
With that bloke, I love him as a footballer, but when it comes to SuperCoach, he has haunted me for years on end. And I remember there was a season. I was going back probably 5 seasons ago, maybe at a guess, 4 or 5, and I remember he started getting some injuries, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to fade him. And it worked out well because he ended up getting injured. And then I sworn myself off him ever since. And then last year, the start of 2023, I said, nope, he's in my burn book, never again list, didn't start him. And then I'm going to blame Bevo for this because he didn't select McLean. And so I ended up downgrading him, had some extra cash, and thought, you know what, let's bring in Fyfe. Let's jump on the bandwagon. And he absolutely burnt me. Lasted 1 round, which is probably around about what I expected him to last. And then, when he was right for the rest of the season, when he came back in the back half, and I was screaming, do not go for him. Like, on anyone that tunes into our podcast and vodcast, Liam and I, we were like, do not go for him. He's going to re-injure himself. same injury that he's had. And what happened? He got injured. So, but I mean, if you want to go for him, extra trades, who knows? Take a risk.
Hear me out. Like I said, this isn't based on statistics. This is purely tell me that no one in the football world can think of Nat Fyfe and not go like, oh, it just it gives me like the good vibes, like he's a good guy. He plays for he's probably like one of the most notorious modern Fremantle players. It's like him, David Mundy, and soon to be Andrew Brayshaw. Like I said, he's there because it's fun for me to pick him, and it's February. Whether he makes the final cut, I don't know, man. He's 283, so he's not necessarily worse than any of the other picks that people are making.
As a Freo man, I have to I'm legally obligated to like Nat Fyfe.
Are correct.
And I do like the reports of him looking back to his best, but I just can't. I mean, like, if he comes out and he looks like the Fyfe of old, and I'll happily put up my hand and offer my shoulder to him so he doesn't injure it again. But I just can't select him. I just can't do it because I can't. I mean, AFL Ratings Pete put up a tweet today about how he had Yo in his side for a whole 5 seconds because he put him in, there was an earthquake, and he knew that it was the wrong thing. Every time I think about clicking on that little plus sign next to Nat Fyfe's name, ghosts come out from my walls telling me not to do it. So
the thing about it is, and I know this isn't the Nat Fyfe segment, so the thing about it is that at his price, he only needs a smaller piece of the pie to be worth the value. That's all I'll say in terms of a pro pick that's actually based in some kind of logic. He doesn't need as much as he would say compared to a Hayden Young, who he needs a significant for his price. Hayden Young needs a significant increase in his output to have made that pick worth the value. That's just logic. It's the same thing with like Andy Brayshaw. You kind of get what you pay for him. Same with Caleb Sarong. One's going to be up, one's going to be down. You know how that works. But these guys like Fyfe and Young with the question marks on them, I know which one represents lower risk and an easier parachute option, as MJ would put it.
I must admit, what you just said there, Clarky, was what I said myself at the start of 2023 when I jumped onto Fyfe, and I said all he has to do is last at least a month, and he lasted 1 week.
You're injured until you're not.
Exactly.
That's all I'll say.
But I was again, I revisited it, and I was like, maybe I could, and slapped myself at the back of the head. And I was like, oh, maybe like if he goes back to the midfield, and I'm like, well, we got Sarong, got Brayshaw, got O'Meara, got Young, who's now sort of going full time into the midfield. So I don't know. I could see Freo, if he does play more midfield, that he's going to be, and you'd be able to speak to this Damo or D1. I just think he's going to be rotated a bit more and rested a bit more just so he lasts the season. But who knows? It may mean that he is a good selection, doesn't get injured.
I'll say as well, we're talking about picking Jack Billings, who isn't really that far away from how much Fyfe costs.
I can't, just for the record, I can't pick Jack Billings either for the same reason. So I'm not telling people to pick Jack Billings. I'm not telling people to pick Nat Fyfe. All I'm saying is...
these are two players that exist.
I know that they are popular players that people are selecting, and there are tactics around those two players that we probably should talk about. And it's fair, now we've talked about it, so we can move on now.
D1 would like to stop talking about it.
Stop cursing his players.
But because of the round 0 buys, it makes trading between rounds 7 and 11 before the mid-season buys start up so important, because you have to not only use what you've learnt from the first 6 rounds, but also what you've learnt from those previous buys to set your team up again to go through another series of buys. So who do you target? Do you target round 15 players so you can then get the round 12, 13, 14 players when they come off their buy? Do you kind of ignore it again, like we kind of done with round 0, or what sort of strategy what kind of strategy can you learn from the round 0 buys that you can then take into the mid-season buys?
Dito, I'll let you have the floor with this one. I need a break.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about Nat Fyfe too much.
Getting a bit hot under the collar.
Yeah.
Understandable. Yeah, I mean, these are obviously the only buys that we normally have to contend with, and it comes down to this discussion point every year. But looking at it this season, round 14 and 15, there's 6 teams on the bye across both of those rounds, and that will royally, I won't swear, but it will royally stuff us. I think either one of those rounds, depending on the number of selections that you have of players across both of those buys. But for me, I think historically what I've done is, if there's a buy round where it's stacked against me and I have quite a few players that I'm targeting, I'd love to get in my team. But if they're in those rounds that are going to hurt me, I'll hold off getting them, maybe to the detriment. Depends as well how those players are traveling, price point, break even, all that sort of stuff. But I try ideally to try and spread it out and not overload my team so it doesn't, put me out for those rounds that I'm going to be hurt the most, where there's more teams on the bye in those specific rounds. So I don't know. It's a sort of a long answer short is I would have them in mind leading up to the bye rounds. But yeah, kind of use it if you're using round 0 as a bit of an example, or the early buy rounds. If you can, trade out guys that are going into their buy to players that have already had their buy. So, for example, if you're round 14, if there's a Carlton rookie that you've got, say a Jackson Binns, he's made a bit of dosh into round 14, Carlton's buy, you trade him out for, say a Freo rookie who's had their buy in the preceding round in round 13. So, that's kind of my thinking, loose thinking. But yeah, things change, and obviously depends upon what I said, price points and, break evens, all that sort of stuff, which kind of dictates it as well.
Because it feels like in previous seasons, the mid-season buys have sort of dictated how you set your team up. But this year, it's the early buys, the round 0 buys that people are focusing more on. And Clarky, it feels like these mid-season buys aren't being ignored, but they're being looked at a lot less than we probably should be looking at them.
In the wildest way possible, I'm looking forward to those buys because they're the most normal thing about this year. We know exactly how to handle a big buy. And D2, I'm really glad that you're here because I agree with exactly what you said, where it's important to just make sure that you maintain balance in your team. You don't swing too far one way or too stacked another way in one particular buy. And then you target players who are going into their buy and are coming off their buy. Focus on having green ticks on your field. That's the number one thing that a lot of people get tripped up in their own buys, is that they focus on going, I want X player, I need to get them in the buys because that's when you do your upgrades. But instead, you should be focusing on how can I get the best score with the most amount of playing players that I can out of this round. It might mean that you have to bring in a premium who you weren't necessarily thinking about before. And I know that I've said you do want to pick players that you want, but you also have to let yourself be led a little bit in the sense of who's doing well, who's not doing well. So between rounds 7 and 11 is really when you should just be maintaining your team, I think.
Bit
your
of a
team,
plateau even.
Yeah. So your team should be in a pretty good position, and then you're just making moves that are economically sound to build up a little bit of bank. If you've got players who rookie gets dropped, somebody gets suspended, somebody gets injured, those kinds of things. It's a maintenance mode where you need to be kind of stockpiling yourself to then go hard from 12 to 15.
Yeah, 100%. And just looking at, I've actually done a quick rundown as well for those buys. For the 4 buys there, 12, 13, 14, 15, I've got round 12, 5 players in the buy. Round 13 is going to be pretty easy, as we know. 3, round 14, 12, and round 15, 9. So it probably helps that they're at the back end of that buy block, so you can kind of, I guess, prepare for it, and it doesn't sort of throw you out if it was, bookended either side. But yeah, like that just says to me that, yep, use 7 to 11. So, just set up my team. And if I need to sort of find a bit of balance where I can maybe, trade in some players that have around 12, round 13 buy and are going to be available for round 14 and sort of level out my my buy structure there a bit easier. So yeah, it's always good to keep in mind how many players leading up to then, how many players are going to be missing. And yeah, it's probably part of the reason why SuperCoach Plus is pretty helpful as well in that respect.
Yeah.
It's just the old school pen and paper, getting out your notes on your Mac or your Windows and just type it in. Always helps provide a bit of a guide.
Yep.
And if I was looking at the buys on the surface, it looks like round 14 might be that consensus dud buy that always seems to happen every year, just because Carlton, Essendon, Geelong, Gold Coast, Melbourne, West Coast all have some pretty popular selections. So round 14, is it the consensus dud buy, or is that sort of a myth?
I think the split would have to be between round 14 and 15 for me. I think there's a lot of popular selections I can see that are pretty big cogs in that round 15 buy. You've got the Crows, Collingwood, Doggies, Hawks, St Kilda, and Richmond. So I'm thinking people who jump on Sinclair and Steele, people who jump on Sicily, or like a Will Day. You've got Bontempelli and any of the Bulldogs, Dacos and the Crows, and the Crows, Dawsons and Laird. So I think between 14 and 15 are going to be... Some people are going to hate 14 and some people are going to hate 15, and it's just going to be 2 weeks of people complaining about it on Twitter. And I encourage you to do that. Let it out.
Yeah.
It's hard. It sucks.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap the episode up there. Thanks for joining us, Damo. Where can people find you?
No worries. Thanks for having me, boys. Anytime you need an extra hand, you need a co-host, feel free to hit me up, even if it's to just shoot the shit and talk nonsense. But yeah, you can hit us up on YouTube. Just search SuperCoach Edge, which is our vodcast, obviously. And through our audio podcast, you can just search SuperCoach Edge. We're on Spotify, Apple, all those platforms. And on Twitter, just search SuperCoach_Edge, Facebook, TikTok, all that. We're pretty much everywhere. We're like a plague, so apologies.
And Clarky, as always, thank you.
It's such a pleasure. And listeners, do go and check out SuperCoach Edge. Go check out any of our guests that we have on there, all usually from the content creation sphere. And it really helps us a lot when you go and engage with our content, even Footy Mailbag, SuperCoach Edge. Go and rate, review us on your podcast network of choice, platform network, whichever one. Leave comments on our YouTubes. Interact with us, because all of those things help us with the algorithm. It's a messy world out there if you're trying to be a content creator, especially for something that, in the nicest way possible, is a bit of a niche when it comes to SuperCoach. Like, we are a pretty tight community, so supporting all of us as content creators, or even just any content creators that you enjoy, just give them a shout out, give them some love, because we love you and we do it because we love it. So we want to get it to as many people as we can.
If you haven't already, join the Mailbag League for your chance to win a Mailbag tee for best team name. And the highest ranking team at the end of the season will also win a $50 AFL Store Voucher. Code for the league is 422899. Again, code for that league is 422899. And if you are setting up a SuperCoach league of your own and you want to give the winner something to brag about, head to supercoachchampion.com. You have been listening to the Footy Mailbag. Don't miss a thing from us this preseason. All the relevant links will be in the description of this episode, wherever you are listening. We'll talk next time.